WNST, Towson, Baltimore. Baltimore Positive. We're positively into the 4th of July week. If you're watching out on the Zoom cast, YouTube cast, you'll see I'm wearing my Straight Outta Dundalk shirt. I am very proud of the Heritage Fair. We're going to be doing Heritage Fair activities this week. All of it courtesy of our friends at Wise Markets, Wise Conversations, local people, taking care of local people. We got a lot of Wise Markets in Dundalk. We got 3 or 4 that I can think of right now over on that side of town. We'll be over there celebrating this weekend with the music on Sunday night at Crack the Sky. And come on out, celebrate 100.7, have a beer in the beer garden, do the whole thing. We're going to be at Fadley's on Thursday doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour presented by the Maryland Lottery. I'll be giving away these instant lottery scratch-offs. Not as lucky a batch at Spirits West, but if anybody won $100 over there, they didn't tell me. But we did have some winners up at the local in Fallston as well as at McFall's Oyster and Reel. It's been a really fun spring. We got a summer schedule ahead to do this with our friends at Winter Nation, 866-90 Nation. I have the wacky floppy hat. I'll have that on my head at Fadley's on Thursday morning as we get ready for the 4th of July. Look, my last name's Aparicio. It's always baseball season around here, despite the fact that I'm wearing my Straight Outta Dundalk shirt. We had a lot of Dundalk baseball, too, Bilecki and some others. But this guy here joined me earlier. He's got a great name because, like, John Miller means, like, a lot to Baltimore people. And the loss of John Miller was probably the original sin in the garden of Peter and Lou and John back in the day. But this John Miller has an H in his name. He is up at Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and he is an author and a real journalist, kind of like I used to be before they threw me out. I don't know what happens when the establishment throws you out and you're a journalist. Probably makes you a real journalist. John Miller joins us now from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He is doing a book on Earl Weaver. We had a beautiful conversation. Man, it feels like about 9 months ago. It was a long time ago. It was in football season, actually, as I remember it, about you doing research on Earl and you finding me through me in some sort of weird way. I did the last interview with Earl Weaver. And I told that story last time. It happened in my old home at the Royal Senested, Harbor Court. And Earl's been gone now. I remember I was on a bus to Foxborough for a championship game. So I guess it was a couple weeks before the Super Bowl. So I guess Earl's been gone almost 10 years, a little more than 10 years right now. 10 years. Yeah. And you have decided to go back and in the era of analytics, in the era of all of these changes in baseball that began with Earl's note cards in 1968, go back and do something that I haven't read. I haven't really read a legitimate biopic or inside the mind of Earl. I did my best to get inside his mind. You found me, and I'm glad you're a guest on my show. How's the book going, dude? What's going on?
Yeah, well, a lot actually, because, when I called you is because I was touched by those interviews, because I hadn't found many interviews where he was that thoughtful and profound. And I guess it was because he was about to die and leave us. And I think he was a bit more honest. And I think you brought that out of him. So I credit you for that. Well, at that point, I had not yet sold the book. So the way that, books work for nonfiction books is you write a proposal that's like a sample chapter and a synopsis and a marketing plan. And
you teach me all of this for when they throw me out of radio after 30 years. So
I quit the Wall Street Journal, so I know all about leaving establishment media and trying to do your own thing.
I have never been do I look establishment? Seriously, look at me. Anyway.
You take that proposal to agents. Basically, agents are the gatekeepers. You find an agent who digs your stuff. If you find one, they can sell it pretty quick because publishing companies trust them. But I failed 24 times to find with 24 different agents who rejected me or ignored me. And what was interesting, Nestor, is that the version of the book that was like, I'm going to tell you why Earl Weaver was so great in the 70s and why the Orioles were so great, which they were, that was not selling because I think people felt like they had read that story before. What did sell was, here's a story of a guy who did not make the major leagues, even though he got very close. He failed for 20 years in the minors. He was a late bloomer. And then finally, after 20 years, he made it and became the most successful manager and the most innovative manager of his day. And that's why he's in the book Moneyball. That's why I thought it was a good idea to go back and revisit and explain who this guy was and just find out some new stuff. And what are the Earl Weaver stories we haven't heard? All the stories are so cliche. It's like pitching, defense, 3-run homers,
Yeah, and ripping up the rule books and pissing on the
cigarettes.
umpires. And I mean, there had to be some genius in Earl through all of that.
Yeah. So
And
what's
I
the
look,
story
I
we
spent a
don't
little bit of
know?
time around him as a young guy and was very
Yeah.
intimidating. He was always
Yeah.
intimidating to say for being a small man. I mean, first off, he was
Well,
like a father figure to a kid who was 5 years old in 1973 and watching
yeah.
him, and the way he behaved made it okay to act like that in Eastwood Little League in
Well,
1979. My dad was a bit of a hothead as
yeah.
well. So, like, the Earl Weaver hothead on the field, man, I was out there the night the Howler thing happened where Eddie
Yeah.
Murray's laughing in his glove. Flanagan and I, before we lost Mike and I had a hell of a laugh because Mike was the pitcher that night, moving off the
Yeah.
mound. And my
So
wife and I, when we get to have a really bad day, we'll YouTube the Earl Weaver Howler
yeah,
exchange about, effing up
you say
World Series and
you're
like all of that, right?
you're here for one reason.
Right, to F us.
So
Right.
I interviewed the production crew. I have a whole chapter on that argument and how that happened. It was a hot mic. They were doing a story about umpires. So Haler had a hot mic and he forgot to take it off. And so that was in the first inning. Flanagan hit the first batter, and then 3 pitches into the game tries to pick him off, and that's when the balk is called. That brings out Earl. Orioles PR is freaking out. It was John Blake, who now does PR for the Rangers. I talked to him.
John's a great guy. Oh
Yeah,
my.
he was doing Orioles PR, and he tried to physically fight the tape away from a guy named Cheese, who is the sound man, who I have not been able to find, but that's the two other production guys told me that. So Cheese is trying to keep this tape, and he's like, "No, John, you ain't getting this effing tape." And they're fighting over this tape. They take it back to the studio. It goes viral, 80s style, like bootleg VHS tapes, becomes like a smash hit of the underground, baseball media. And
Well,
then
the Alice in the Tomato Patch audio hit me very early
yes,
on in my career in
also,
1991.
yep.
Always available on cassette tape. I can burn it down for you if you
And
need
that
it.
was Earl's idea because the guy was really funny. And that's the thing. Like, you can say what you
Well, it's
want about
Tom
all
Marr. It was
other
Tom.
stuff.
T-Bone's listening right now. Brandon, their dad. I mean, Tom Marr was on
Yeah,
CBS.
but
So
Earl was up for it because he was hilarious and he was just a funny, smart guy that sports writers loved. And that's why it's going to be fun to spend 200 pages with him. I hope.
So I look. I almost feel like I'm having a beer with you at this point because that's where we are. It is some Rofo coffee in my Cole Roofing mug, as the Cole Roofing people call me about my most recent flood. Uh, so I would just say this on. I talked to you on the record, off the record. We did this on the air. Now we did it off the air, trying to find every Billy Hunter, trying to find everyone who's alive who may have Ken Singleton. But I'm thinking of the people that are still very vibrant that maybe have never been at. I mean, look, Palmer's done every cocktail conversation, every rubber chicken dinner. He was 5 feet, I was 7 feet. Together, we
Yeah.
were 11 feet. We made bobblehead. I mean, and all of that freaking frack thing with Palmer. But I don't know that anybody's really ever sat down with Jim Palmer and gotten real serious, not about what a character Earl was or whatever, but his mind. And
Yeah.
even with Palmer disagreeing with him or whatever,
Yeah.
their shtick is what their
Yeah.
shtick. But I mean, they were together for 20 years.
But
And
you
they
know
both
what?
went to the Hall of Fame. And
Yeah.
I would think the amount of stories. I mean, Phil Jackman is struggling, and Phil's like a father to me, like an uncle.
Hmm.
Love Phil. Phil would have a million stories for you and gave
Hmm.
me a bunch of stories. But I'm thinking of every Richard Justice and Jim
Yeah.
Kirchin and Ken Rosenthal. Those guys were all around the irascible end of
Yeah.
Earl
Yeah.
after Earl didn't win, had
Yeah.
to broadcast Joe
Yeah.
Altobelli winning
I
with his
know.
team.
I
I've
know.
watched that tape many times with Howard Cosell ribbing him and Reggie
Well,
Jackson in the locker
yeah.
room, like all of that. But then Earl came back and they stunk, and Earl couldn't get out of his way. And then Earl went to the Hall of Fame and I guess mellowed a little bit. But man, there are got to be a lot of people that have really sat and talked
Yeah.
baseball with Earl, not shtick with Earl, baseball.
The whole project started because I wrote Earl's obituary for the Wall Street Journal, and Tom Boswell, who is my childhood hero, sent me an email saying this was really nice. Earl would have, loved this obituary. So I thought, well, maybe there's more I can do about this guy that has not been done yet. So I've sat down with Singleton, Dempsey. I've talked to Tippy Martinez. I've emailed with Palmer. We haven't sat down yet, but
Neither have I. I've been trying to get
hopefully
Jim for 31 years now.
plan
If
to.
anybody sees Jim, let him know that I'd like to sit and talk to him.
Yeah,
By the way, Jim Palmer's the greatest Baltimore athlete there ever was. Probably there ever will be. No
I
offense to Ray
agree.
Lewis or Cal Ripken or Brooks or
He's
like
got
pick anybody
the
you
three
want.
rings. Yeah, I agree.
No,
So
he's just
yeah,
go look at his stats. It's a different level of when he's
but
in the boot. We take him for granted, Palmer. We really do.
I agree. I agree. Very talented and broadcasting and pitching incredible. But that's the thing. Earl Weaver gets reduced to cliches, man. And like he was a human being. He used to be a little boy, growing up in St. Louis with the dream of being a Major League Baseball player. He made one big league spring training camp in 1952, and he was cut on the last week by his own manager, who made himself the backup second baseman. And that Earl Weaver was 21. He was almost going to make the major leagues. And that crushed him. And that's when he started getting really depressed, started drinking too much. And it took him 20 years to get back to the majors. So that's kind of the human story.
52 to 68, right?
16 years. Yeah, sure. Yep. That's
Wow.
yeah. It took him
And what
16
what
years.
was his pathway in a biopic sort of way? What because I know I talked to him about why he became a man. I don't remember the conversation.
Yeah.
Honest, John, you'll find this hard to believe. I make the pizza and I serve it, and I rarely go back and eat it again. You know what I mean? Like, and because I'm always making it, I don't even know
Yeah.
what Earl said to me that day. I should throw it
Earl.
into my Otter
Yeah.
box and get the
Yeah.
transcript thrown out. I should at least do that.
Well, I have done that for the record. So Earl's from St. Louis. His dad was a business owner who owned the laundromat that washed uniforms for the Cardinals and the Browns, the Gas House Gang teams of Dizzy Dean. So Earl knew those guys, knew Dizzy Dean and Joe Medwick and the famous Cardinals. He was also raised in part by an uncle who was a bookie, who was kind of a tough guy and a gambler and a gangster. So that's where Earl's tough guy side came from. Earl was a great young player. He signed out of high school,
Now,
played
was
4 years.
Yogi Bear involved in that way in any way in St. Louis?
Yeah, they played on the same Legion team, not teammates. Yogi was older, but they were in the same Legion program, so they knew each other.
Well, I'm a
St.
travel
Louis.
log and I'm a foodie
Yeah,
log and whatever. And when I went to St. Louis, Bernie Miklasz, who I worked with 40 years ago here in Baltimore, and the St. Louis people. I mean, Howard Balzer was out there at the time covering the Rams. They all sent me to great places. I mean, I've been to
yeah,
just Americana awesomeness, but
fun.
the
Yeah,
Little Italy area
yeah,
of St. Louis. It has a different name than Little Italy, I
yeah.
think.
The Hill.
Um,
They call it the Hill.
the Hill.
Yeah,
Thank you. Has all of these Italian restaurants,
yeah.
and everything about it is Yogi Berra. There's a
Good
baseball
call.
field in the
Yeah,
middle of the neighborhood. I
yeah,
mean, if you
yeah.
ever go to St. Louis, and it's not like hard to access, but it's not like on the bus line or on
So
the the rail. You have to like drive into it. It's not downtown. It's a
here,
neighborhood.
Here's
And
a fun fact. So Earl's mom was German, so she cooked German food. So that's what he grew up eating, sauerkraut and cabbage and such. And they also gardens. His parents liked the garden. That's where he learned how to garden. And so he knew Yogi, but they were not part of the same clan. Like Yogi was Italian, Earl was German. Earl was more down by the docks, kind of tough guy, street guy, whereas Yogi was more Italian, working class. But yeah, I want to tell those stories and humanize him. And his
who
uncle
else was
Bud,
from St. Louis? Were there other people involved in his childhood?
Joe Garagiola, a bunch of people went to his high school who played in the major leagues. Roy Sievers, people whose names are forgotten, but his high school was a really good
I had
baseball
all
high
those
school.
baseball cards, and I've had Joe Garagiola on the
Yeah,
show 100 times.
yeah. So Earl went to a really good baseball high school, which graduated a lot of pro baseball players, and he was going to be one of them, and that was his dream. And it got crushed, and that's what set him on a path to being a manager. But also accounts for his kind of anger and bitterness too, that he really deserved. I think he deserved to make the major leagues. He hit 300 in spring training and batted in the same lineup as Stan Musial, his childhood hero, and then got cut. Crushed him.
Yeah, well, John Miller's here doing a book. I always ask this because I mean Eisenberg. I've written a couple books myself. I know how difficult it is. I've done it very in an unorthodox way, running a radio station, doing my thing, not with like a publisher and deadlines and editors and all of those big league things that you would have. When does it end for you? I mean, at some point, don't be Tom Scholes making Boston 3. Don't make this 15 years. But there comes a point where I know from a book standpoint, I did mine on really tight deadlines because they were Super Bowl books that I wanted to get out by
Yeah.
Father's Day. So I went Jack Nicholson up to the hotel and all work and no play makes, Nestor a dull boy. I think when you have something like this, you want to make it as great as you can make it, but you don't want it released in 2028 either, right?
I agree. So I signed the contract in November after we talked. Very exciting with Simon and Schuster. It's a big publisher. The book is
I've
due
heard of
end
them.
book is due end of this year. My editor is also Tom Brady's editor. Did Tom Brady's diet book. That's very exciting. So December 31st, I have
You get
90,000.
avocado ice cream out of this or anything? You get a little deal?
90,000 words due end of this year. Then we spend all of next year working on it. So I've been told spring 2025. That's what I've been told.
So I'm early on this. I'm early to the party, is what you're telling me. Yeah, I do not even have your best stories yet on the radio as part of this whole thing because, like, I bet you're still going to unearth some stuff here. So you're in hardcore find people, find stories. What
Yeah,
what are you seeking that you don't know about Earl Weaver that you're looking for in the next conversation with the next? When you sit with Palmer, I mean, Palmer's going to tell you. Palmer can write his own book on. I'm sure he
yeah.
could. I'm sure he could.
I mean, here's the thing that was weird is that they all made fun of him, but yet they respected his leadership. And I think that's really an important lesson about leadership that we all can learn from is, they mocked this guy and would tease him and imitate his voice and mess with him. But at the end of the day, he also led them to glory and they all followed his lead because he had baseball in his heart so purely, I think, because he had done it since he was 4 years old. He had started dreaming of being a big league ball player when he was 4 and didn't stop for 50 years. And so why do these guys follow somebody they made fun of all the time? I think is a really big question I'm after.
Well, he was such a hero in Baltimore, right? And in my childhood, and he was the manager, the only in the way that whenever Harbaugh leaves or Tomlin leaves Pittsburgh, where you are, people will be like, I don't even remember Cowher, I don't even remember Billick, because it's
Yeah.
starting to be like a long, long time, and that's. I just mentioned a couple football coaches, Belichick's and places like that. The NBA doesn't have anything like that. The NHL has nothing like that.
Popovich in the NBA is like that.
Popovich, fair enough, fair enough. But I mean, there's no pedigree of that,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
certainly in baseball,
Well,
Sosha hung around a while, and some guys, Gerard, some guys have hung
but
around a little while. But this is, what Earl did was an old world sort of thing to come in
yeah.
and win championships with 2 or 3 different eras of players.
Here's a stat for you. Between 68 and 82, when he was the manager, the Orioles employed one manager. Every other major league team employed 300 combined. They changed managers all the time. The Orioles he was the only one who was never fired in the 70s. And that's the key to the greatness too, is that he lost Frank Robinson, he lost these players and
Dude,
somehow
he lost everybody. I
kept them
mean, I
going.
lost everybody. I was a kid. What's Doug DeCinces doing in the Angels hat? Where's Don Baylor? Hey, didn't we have Reggie here for 5 minutes? Holy hell! Where's Wayne Garland? You know what I
You
mean?
know
Like
what?
every
Because
guy that played well
because
here in the 70s left because we were broke. So get used to Rutschman and get used to Gunnar Henderson and Manny Machado. I mean, all of that, the 90s and the amount of money and what the Orioles became, and I'm researching that because
yeah,
I don't know, John, if you know this or not, they don't have a lease. There's no lease for the team. And I'm
yeah,
the only guy that's actually talking about that
yeah,
because WBAL doesn't employ journalists.
yeah,
Jason Lockenfor is now working for Masson. So, there's
yeah,
not going to be any reporting on
yeah,
any of this. They don't have a lease here.
yeah,
And I'm talking about that. But
yeah,
the baseball thing that's been laid here and the greatness of all of this and all the money the Angelos boys have made and every
yeah,
Palmero that came in here and every Aubrey Huff that took millions of dollars. Man, all of
yeah,
this was laid by Brooks and by Palmer and Frank and
yeah,
Boog and my cousin
yeah,
and like all that in 66.
yeah,
But boy, Weaver's era and Weaver's leadership
yeah,
and Hoffberger's leadership as an owner and then EBW and that era is a case
yeah.
study because
Because you know what
Baltimore
about
couldn't afford the Orioles. They
yeah,
lost the Colts. They
yeah,
lost every player other than Brooks
yeah,
and Palmer. And everybody was afraid Palmer was. I mean, it's amazing Palmer didn't go pitch for the Red Sox or the Yankees.
yeah,
I mean, it
yeah.
really is
So
amazing because we lost everybody else.
let me answer my own question here about what made Earl so great. And you can make fun of the players made fun of him, and everybody can make fun of the smoking and the drinking and the cussing, but he really, really cared. And I think that's what made him great is that he knew baseball and he cared and he kept on caring. And when he came back in 85, he came back for the money and his heart was not in it. And I think that is a lesson too, that if your heart's not in it, you're not going to do well. And he didn't.
Well, for you in researching him and 90,000 words, which feels like a lot of words till you have 130,000, you have to start to edit it. Because
You're so right.
I know about these things.
You do know, yeah.
At some point you stop the research. Who else do you need to talk to besides Palmer?
I mean, as many as people will talk to me, like I was emailing with John Maroon last week, and hopefully talk to Cal soon. And you know, Eddie's not talked to me yet. A few others from that. I mean, Brooks is not doing great. Have
has
not
Don
talked.
Stanhouse talked to you?
Yeah, I've talked to him. Yeah, he's fun. But you know, the Orioles years, to me, it's not the key mystery. The key mystery is more the 30s, 40s, 50s, is who was Earl Weaver before he got to the Orioles. And going deeper in those years and the things we don't know about. You know, this uncle who was a gangster. I mean, the guy taught him analytics through gambling. I mean, I think that's fascinating. Like, that's how Earl Weaver learned math, was hanging out with his bookie uncle. And that story's never been told. You know, I'm going to tell it. And
Now it
just
just
going,
is. You just told it.
I know, but well, not as
Where'd you
in depth.
find that one? Is that well?
He says it in his own book, in his own memoir. He talks about his bookie uncle. And then if you do more research, you find out the guy was arrested for all kinds of nasty stuff. I mean, you know, I'm beating up a congressman, running the mayor's dice game. You know, he was a real hoodlum, this guy in St. Louis in the 40s. And that's who father, you know,
Earl
helped
Weaver's
father.
gangster uncle.
Yeah. That's like a punk band, right? I'm the next punk
Well,
band.
you're certainly picking a good time to write a book about Oriole history or a key person in the Orioles. You know, as I said, all of this from where we are right now, if you trace it back, if there's no Earl, I don't know there's any of this. If
Oh,
there's no
I love
Brooks,
this.
no
I love
Palmer.
this. I love this story. And by the way, you know, I live in Pittsburgh, but I love the Orioles, and I grew up listening to John Miller in Belgium. And when I was in San Francisco, I was being 19 and wild, and I talked my way into the broadcast booth to meet the real John Miller, the other John Miller. I'm also the real John Miller.
Right.
To meet the other John Miller and just thank him for being my favorite broadcaster. And he signed my little journal when I was 19, keeping a journal. And I met him, and that was really fun. And I you know, obviously love that guy.
Well, see, I've been on the radio 31 years, so I was in the middle of all of the contract. I was the guy taking phone calls when Peter fired him and threw him out and blamed it on his wife on my airwaves. Peter came on my airwaves and blamed John Miller's wife for him leaving Baltimore.
What did
John
he
Miller
say?
sat in my studio and sobbed on the air over at the
Oh
Sheraton in
God.
Towson when he came back on a book tour. He had written a book when he was with the Giants and they were playing Philadelphia because there were no Washingtons. This was
Yeah.
1997. I was before I even had NST. This is in my old. I'm celebrating 25 years of having the radio station in 6 weeks, 5 weeks, and
Yeah.
on August 3rd. We'll be at Dundalk, by the way. I want to plug that because I'm straight out of Dundalk. We're going to be in Costas on August 3rd, celebrating 25 years. It's all brought to you by the Maryland Lottery and our friends at Window Nation. We'll be there all day on the 3rd, and then on the 4th, we're going to be at
You know,
Drug City celebrating. But part of all the celebration, my last name's Aparicio. This goes back to baseball and football really being sort of these root parts of our
yeah.
community. And Earl, you talk about him being a nephew of the gangster and all that stuff, but the baseball side of Earl, I don't think any of us ever thought of Earl Weaver playing baseball or even thought, was he a second baseman? What did he play? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it never occurred to me as a kid that Earl ever played baseball.
Yeah, I know, because he looks so funny, and you know, he ate and drank too much, and so he gained some weight and was not in playing shape. But you know, Tippy Martinez told me a story that he used to imitate or replace the base runner when they would do pickoff moves. And so he was on first base, and he says to Flanagan, "Aren't you going to try to pick me off?" And Flanagan says, "I can't see anybody. Is there somebody on first base?" Because they were always making fun of how short he was.
Flanagan was a killer with the sense of humor, man. I mean,
Yeah.
Flanagan would dice you up. There's no doubt about that. John Miller's here. He's writing a book on Earl Weaver. It's not due for a little while, but I'm having him tell me some stories anyway. So the heart of this thing really, it's not an Oriole story, right? At all. Like it's an Earl biography, and the Orioles are part of it. But you're way more interested in
Yeah, I
how
would
he
say half.
got there and how
I would say
those
half.
16 years are a hard 16 years, right?
I would say half the book is the Orioles. But I mean, I think if you're an Orioles fan, you're gonna be fascinated because I'm going to tell you where this guy came from, because he's such a weird person. Like there's nobody else like him in American baseball, even American history. I mean, don't forget, he was on the cover of Time magazine. He was the Playboy interview between Ansel Adams and Ted Turner. That's how important he was to the culture. Like he was a big deal in American culture in the 70s and
He
80s, and
did a
people
Playboy
forget.
interview.
Yes, he was
Yeah.
yeah,
What, who was on
83.
the cover?
my,
What
my wife says, I feel like that magazine is in every room of the house.
1983?
Yeah, you can find it online. Yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah.
what
So
did he say? That's an
he was
interesting
so
time in his life, right? Like he had just walked
yeah,
away, ridden off on the car. Sutton beat
yeah.
Palmer. We could have, like the whole deal.
He was he was trying to become more of a TV personality, and it turns out he wasn't that good at it. And so ABC did not renew his contract after the 84 season. And that's one of the reasons he came back and managed, was it didn't work out in TV, but he was trying to increase his profile. And again, he was really famous, even among people who are not baseball fans in the 70s and 80s. And that's kind of the point of my book too, is the manager in baseball has lost that cultural relevance he used to have. And Earl had that. So what did he say? I mean, he talked about his life, and they asked him about, religion, sex, those kinds of things that Playboy interviews are about. What's he up to now?
Well,
Gardening,
that's why I
writing.
asked, because like that's an interesting 1982. It's kind of edgy. I mean, Earl had the curly hair going then,
Yeah,
and
he had the
was kind
perm.
of
He had the
like
perm. Yeah,
didn't have to like work in baseball anymore. He was a
yeah,
celebrity. He wasn't a
he
manager
was.
anymore. He was a celebrity at that point, right?
That's right. Yeah, which is funny. Yeah. So yeah, he got pretty deep though. I mean, I talked about um his. We talked a lot about how he was trying to enjoy life and not be a baseball person, and that kind of quest for his own identity. And he said, I didn't want to spend the rest of my life watching the sun go down behind the left field grandstand. Like he wanted to have a life, and he was somebody who, his dad wanted him to be a ball player, dressed him up as a ball player when he was 4 years old, signed when he was 17 out of high school. It's all he ever did or cared about. And all of a sudden he's 53. Who am I? What am I doing? And I think
I
that's
think he
also
just played golf the rest of his life, smoked cigarettes, right? Like
he played a
literally,
lot of
that's what he
golf.
did the last 30 years, right?
He loved the ponies. He loved to gamble. He loved to, talk a lot of crap, make fun of people. He was kind of a troll, honestly. I think he would be very at home in online Twitter
Yeah,
Twitter
he
wars.
came and visited with us at spring training a number of times when
Yeah,
they trained in Fort Lauderdale. So this
yeah.
is late 90s. I have a lot of
Mhm.
pictures of him sitting on our set later in his life, but when he did that, he was just sort of like it wasn't anything in depth, to your point. Like it's nothing I would offer to you to say, this would be good stuff for your book. He's sitting there talking to me and Bob Haney about,
Yeah.
whether Eric some pitcher is going to make it or not,
So
and
yeah,
then none of them made it.
Tom Boswell told me Earl had a shell, and he used that shell to protect himself. But when he revealed himself beneath the shell, which I think you got to in that last interview, people were floored because he was so insightful. He had thought so much about himself and life and baseball, and he had these like incredibly deep ways of looking at the world. Like Tom Boswell told me his favorite saying was, "Everything changes everything," which actually is like one of the most profound quotes in like Roman Greek philosophy, is everything changes. So he had this kind of like very wise way of understanding the world and how complex it is and how you have to accept uncertainty. And so I love that side of him, that he had this depth to him that was, hidden beneath all the temper tantrums and the drinking and the smoking.
Well, I hope you find that depth in him over the next 6 months. I know you're how obsessed are you with this? Have you pissed off everybody in your family? And I mean, I see the beards coming in now. I mean, are you getting to the Torrance phase of this thing
Yeah,
here with
Earl grew a mustache once in the 70s, and it was not a good fit.
I have
But
never seen a picture of that.
I have a picture. I can send it to you. And Kim Benson, his daughter, stepdaughter, when I sent it to her, she was like, "Oh, we all try to forget that time."
You know what I want to see? I want to see. It's very famous to see the picture of the 420 game winners. Cuellar,
Yeah.
McNally, those guys in the orange, the
Hmm.
pumpkin outfits in
Yeah.
'71. Remember that they wore them a couple years
Yep.
ago here. They threw them up to throw them
Yeah.
out, to throw them back. It made me throw up. but they're so ugly, they're beautiful. But a picture of Earl in that gear, that would look
Yeah,
interesting, right?
I think I have that. I also have a picture of Earl as a toddler, which is
I think
pretty
I've
neat.
seen that. He was really cute, right?
Yes,
I
yeah,
think
I
I've
think
seen the toddler picture. I really do.
yeah,
Because it
yeah,
looks
yeah.
like him. It looks like Spanky.
He's got a little bat, yeah.
Well, he
So
was of that
yeah,
era too, right? The our gang era. He
yeah.
was like of that
He
age, right?
born in 1930. Yep. And he he was kind of preppy in his high school, but also he had a foul mouth, and he had a foul mouth when he was
Oh,
a teenager, and he was
always.
famous for teaching the other kids, terrible words.
Well, I mean, poor Alice in Norfolk. I mean, she's still trying to get over, that pinprick. John Miller is here, the other John Miller with the H. He is an author and a journalist and a longtime writer at the Wall Street Journal. He's recovering and working on a Earl Weaver biopic. I check in with him every 6 months. So I owe you a call right around Christmas time. Try to check
Sounds
in. We'll
good.
see where the Ravens and see if Lamar's upright and they're 12-2 at the time, like we all think they're going to be. And the
Yeah.
Steelers, oh, they stink. And the Bengals are like, hey, man, I got to talk to smack here in the summertime with the Ravens. But the Orioles thing, I was going to say to you, and I meandered off topic earlier, but the Orioles' resurgence at this time, an interesting time for you to be writing about this because Brandon Hyde
Yeah.
is about to transcend and survive this, right? He has survived this, right? Like he survived all the
Yeah.
awful. He's here. They're going to be good for a couple of minutes at least for the time being. This is an interesting time for you to write about this because baseball is starting to pick itself back
Yeah.
up a little bit here.
And I can't hide that I love the Orioles, and Brandon Hyde will be the second longest tenured manager soon after Buck. It's Earl, Buck, and then it's going to be Brandon Hyde.
That's an interesting observation, right? That's wild.
Yeah, no, it's obviously terrific, all the young talent, and I'm really enjoying the season. The Orioles have been a bit recalcitrant about talking about Earl. I don't think they sort of worship him like I do. I think they're worried about him being kind of like the embarrassing old uncle. So I've not talked to any current Orioles about Earl Weaver.
Well, they
Uh,
won't know who he is. I mean,
sure, but
no offense, but like,
he's got a statue. He's got a statue. Well, I'm going to tell him who he is. So there you go.
yeah, all right. Straight out of Dundalk. That was the way I would say it if I were you. John Miller's here. He is an author and writer. I'm going to let you get back to doing whatever you do, going up to that crazy fun park they have in Pittsburgh and all the stuff that they do up there in summertime. I'll get up there for a concert before it's all over. Good luck with the book. And I love
Thanks,
checking in
man.
with you. And
Yeah,
you started the whole thing. You found that crazy, wacky video of me with Earl at the
yeah,
end. I wish I would have done more now, right? Like
yeah,
Earl
yeah.
gave me 15 minutes and then 45 minutes into it, he's just talking and I can't stop him. And
Well, I think, and I'll explain this in my book, but like I think when I explain the context of what he was saying, you'll understand how deep your interview was.
wow, now I got to
Yeah,
get your book.
yeah.
John Miller is here. We appreciate the time as always. I appreciate great baseball conversations. We're having them all summer long around here. I'm going to be doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour on Thursday. We're going to be at Fadley's. If John, when you come to Baltimore, I owe you a crab cake at the very, very least. So
Oh, yes,
we'll
please.
take you around and maybe some of Earl Weaver's. I bet he was a Pole Like Johnny's guy, Earl Weaver.
Let's do it.
But we're going to be out this week at Fadley's in the morning on Thursday. Got some great guests lined up. Really looking forward to talking 4th of July, crabs. I got my Leonard Raskin Global crap, but it has the beer opener. So I'm going to have this with me on August the 3rd at Costas as we celebrate 25 years. Big thanks to our friends at Window Nation also for sponsoring the Maryland Crab Cake Tour. Fadley's this week and lots of dates and places into July and into August. 25 oysters coming soon too for our 25th anniversary. I am Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. The legend of Earl Weaver. I love these
Great.
conversations. We never
So
stop talking.
are we off the air here?
Not yet. No. Baltimore positive. Now we're off the air.